coming up.
Does Bill S210 create or call for the creation of a digital ID?
Absolutely not.
Okay. Would it be possible to use the provisions of this bill to create a digital ID?
No.
Age verification in the process. You had mentioned, and the bill mentions, that this is going to be done by a third-party company. Are there currently any Canadian companies who do this type of business, and who would they do it for? And I mean, just specifically the age verification.
You'll agree with me that the CRTC is the most likely agency to deal with this.
I'm not agreeing with you.
This Guy's Garage. Like and subscribe.
Thank you, Senator. I'm going to go quite quickly through a series of questions. I'd be grateful if you could be as short as possible, even providing a yes or no where appropriate. You said in the Senate study, 24 witnesses, 28 briefs. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
In two committees, because we had to do it twice. The bill passed twice, the Senate.
Okay. And after those hearings, the bill was passed unanimously and unopposed by all senators. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Does Bill S210 create or call for the creation of a digital ID?
Absolutely not.
Okay. Would it be possible to use the provisions of this bill to create a digital ID?
No. There's zero mention of digital ID in this bill.
Thank you. Bill S210 requires that some age verification method be used, but it does not prescribe the method. So is that correct, and why not explicitly define the age verification method in statute?
Well, this is how we write proper legislation. Age verification are technical by nature, and we have said in the bill, and it's very clear at Article 11, that precautions have to be taken, best practice has to be used, privacy has to be respected. But to choose age verification method in the bill would be a grave error, because those techniques change. And we want in the regulation, the specialists, the experts, and the government to choose the best age verification method at the time they will act on it.
As technology evolves. Okay, so are there age verification methods that do not involve identity verification?
Yes. If I take here, if I quote from the Ofcom, which is the regulatory agency in Britain, one of them, they say kinds of age insurance that could be highly effective, because they're at the stage of putting in regulation. They have passed a whole bill about that. And they mention face age estimation, which is, you've heard about age estimation. It works by analyzing the feature of a user face to estimate their age, but there's no collection at all of identity. It's done through estimation plus or minus 2 years. So that's one of them. There are obviously others.
And there are others besides the face method that would not involve looking at face, but also still provide age estimation without identity.
Absolutely.
Okay. Could the verification process be done by a third party, such that a person's identity could never be linked with their pornography use habits, even if there was a data breach?
Well, if you look at our bill, Article 11 say best practices have to be followed, and obviously, third-party verification is one of the best practices. This is what Germany, France, and the UK are proposing or have implemented already. And the idea, obviously, is not to give any personal data to either porn sites or platforms on the web.
Right, and just to clarify, that separates the verification from the site.
And
you get confirmation of age, and then you take that somewhere else.
Well, it's called, in fact, double anonymity.
Yeah.
Because on one side, the third party the third party does the verification with all the best practices and is submitted to all the privacy law, and it just sends to the porn sites a token, and the only question is this customer 18 years old and more?
Okay.
So the porn site never knows who is coming in the porn site.
Excellent. Would the Privacy Act still apply, and does this bill amend or weaken in any way the protections associated with the Privacy Act?
It applies fully.
Thank you. Would this bill apply to educational materials, artwork involving nudity, or other depictions of the human body that are not pornographic in nature?
No. As I said earlier in Article 6, there's an exception for educational, scientific, and artistic material. So all three are excluded from any age verification.
Thank you. In the absence of meaningful age verification, what is the average age today at which children in Canada are accessing pornography?
So this is one of the worrisome figures. The average age varies according to the studies between 11 and 13 years old, but you should know that the first encounter with porn, 50% of the 13-year-old had their first encounter with porn, 27% of the 11-year-old had it, and 10% of 9-year-old have already watched or been in contact with porn. So we're talking here about huge figures.
Senator, that is horrifying to me. Those are absolutely horrifying numbers. Do you believe that showing children sexually explicit pictures or videos is a form of child abuse?
I do, and because the Canadian Centre for Child Protection has an extremely good reputation in Canada, I will quote them, some of what they're saying about the fact that all children have access without any kind of research on their age. They have access to porn. So here is what the center says. So among the harms to children exposed to sexually explicit material, you have difficulty forming a healthy relationship, harmful sexual beliefs and behaviors, a normalization of sexual harm. They don't see, because porn is there, it's normalized. The porn that you see that can contain violence and degrading act is normal for them. So obviously they're more susceptible to be armed by a pornographer.
One of the concerns that I did want to hear from you on is the whole issue of online privacy. And I'm curious if you could briefly explain what the impact this bill might have on online privacy for Canadians, and whether or not there would be any concerns in respect of the privacy of online users.
Well, first of all, I have to say that Bill 63, Bill 63 doesn't talk about age verification. There's nothing in this bill about age verification. This is not, the word is not even used, and there's very little on pornography. What Bill 63 says is it talks about a very vague concept, which is age-appropriate design. So they're saying that there should be age-appropriate design. Well, I'm sorry, but age-appropriate design is not age verification. It could be at some point if a committee decides, but it's not in the bill. So that's the first thing I wanted to say. About privacy, we have laws in Canada.
Sorry, if I could though, I think one of the concerns on this is the whole issue of personal information, right? So if you, okay, you all right?
So first of all, on this question, obviously we have privacy laws in Canada. Why would suddenly those privacy law would not apply to any company doing third-party verification? It's a nonsense. So I will quote some people that are more experts than me on that, which is the Age Verification Providers Association, who says, privacy-preserving age verification technology is already used at scale. It is highly effective, and our members have already completed over 1 billion age checks. Age verification can be designed to completely protect the identity of the user.
So on that basis, so who would design the technology you're proposing, or what technology are you proposing that be used? Would it be a private sector technology or government?
No, it would not be a government
So
technology.
the private sector would take would be the entity
Well,
that
first
that
of all,
took,
you know-
let me finish the question.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is the private sector would have access to individual Canadians' data. Is that what you're suggesting?
I'm suggesting that all of those questions will be resolved in the regulations. But what I'm saying to you is what we have in this bill is in Article 11, we have 5 principles that will assure that privacy will be respected. I will read the main one to you, which is maintains user, age verification method, the method that will be chosen maintains user privacy and protects user personal information.
5 minutes.
Thank you, Senator. I think it's really important to clarify this issue of site blocking because I think there's been some misinformation around it. So to be really clear, and if you can clarify this, but site blocking is only a penalty for those who persistently refuse to violate the law. So if I commit a crime, I might go to jail. And if I'm sent to jail, that violates my mobility rights and my ability to do all kinds of other things that I would normally be able to do. But that's because I've committed a crime and I'm being penalized for it. In the same way, this bill isn't about site blocking in general. It only allows that to be used as a penalty for those who persistently refuse to follow the law. Is that correct?
This is correct. And if I could add here that in Germany, Twitter was carrying non-porn material and porn material. The government said, you're not doing age verification. And finally, what happened was that Twitter dropped all their porn part. And then they decided by themselves, because they didn't want to be submitted to the age verification law, Twitter just had 60 pages off their site in Germany. So regulations work.
Yeah.
That's what I want to say here.
Thank you. Now on the social media issue, some critics have said, hey, this would apply to social media that choose to host pornographic content and show it to children. But the point would seem to me that if you can't serve alcohol to children at a bar, you also can't serve alcohol to children at an ice cream stand. That if we determine an activity should be age protected, then that age verification has to necessarily exist in every context where that content could be shown to children. The solution is it's not age verification for those sites in general, but it is specifically for the pornographic content we're talking about, because Twitter shouldn't be allowed to show pornography to 9-year-olds. Neither should any other website.
And it's fairly easy to do, because if you've been on Twitter and you've tried to find porn, you will see that there's a page. It announced that sensitive content is coming. So Twitter knows where it is. So it's easy to find, and it can be age blocked, age verified, all those things work. And I would also take this analogy that children, can't go in a bar and drink, but they are allowed to go to restaurant, and then the server is not allowed to have them drink. So it's not so much where, but it's the pornographic content that we're aiming at, and this is where it has to be stopped, because it's obviously not only with porn site, but also on social media platform. And this is where many times the first opportunity for children to have even pops up of pornography.
Yeah. Now, it seems obvious to me that in the world of rapidly evolving technology, there's no way you could put in the text of legislation precisely the kind of age verification method that would be used. That would forestall the process of gradual improvement in terms of effectiveness. But for those who are skeptical of government power in general, what are the safeguards on the regulation-making process that are in the bill and that exist in general?
Well, I would go back to Article 11, because, this is, and this came out of the process in the Senate. This was an amendment, because obviously we got the same concerns, and we said, okay, let's put real safeguard in the bill, and they are at Article 11, and, so the method that will be chosen have to be reliable, maintain user privacy, and protects user personal information, collects and use personal information solely for age verification purpose, destroy any personal information collected for age verification purpose once the verification is completed. We're talking here about destroying it, and then generally complies with the best practices. And yes, in truth, how could we have chosen age verification method? I've been on this for 4 years.
Yeah.
The world has evolved and technology has evolved.
Senator, that's extremely clear in the text of the bill. And I guess to conclude my questions, I mean, how do you account for the volume of misinformation, outright disinformation? I think some of it may be coming from certain industry groups, but how do you account for the volume of just nonsense, frankly? Because there are some people that are scared about what would happen if this bill is passed because they don't understand what it's about at all. How do you account for that, and what's your response to that?
Well, I think it's easy to scare people with disinformation. And for me, I'm incapable of understanding that this falsehood becomes more important than protecting all the children. And as we all know, our rights defended by the Charter are not absolute. Yes, freedom of expression exists, and adults will continue to be able to watch porn. But what about the children? What about the children? This is also, they have rights. So, the United Nations is asking countries now to have age verification system. When I started this bill, it was not as well known. Now time passes, and now it's a real public safety issue. And I think it has to be addressed.
The question that I have is, the legislation that you've proposed doesn't itself include a definition of sexually explicit material or pornography, but it rather refers to a section of the criminal code. And making sexually explicit material available to children, is that right?
Yes.
That's correct?
It's, I will,
Sure.
we refer to, pornography doesn't exist as such in the criminal code to talk about adult sexually explicit material. It exists only to talk about child pornography. So the known term is sexually explicit material, and I would read you the definition because when we read...
So I guess my question is, why didn't you provide a definition of that in your proposed bill? Why are you relying on the definition?
This is the way that it's
code?
done. What I'm doing in this, I'm referring, in the definition, I'm referring to materials, sexually explicit material. And in bills, you don't give the criminal code definition. They stand by themselves in the criminal code because if they're changed, you don't want that to affect your bill.
My first question has to do with, I wasn't sure, someone earlier in the hour, I'm not sure if it was the chair or yourself, Senator, mentioned, and I believe the number was 4 times this different bill you've tried to get through. Could you expand on that? And where and why has that stopped other times?
That's interesting. It's all my life in the 4 last year. Well, not all of it, because I'm a senator on other things too. But yes, I started in 2020. In fact, I went to demonstrate in front of Pornhub against illegal sexual material. They had child pornography. There were some really serious accusation and allegation of child pornography. So I went there. And after this demonstration, I started to talk to myself about, so what are the children doing during this pandemic? And they were on their screens. And that's where the whole idea started to become real. So starting in 2020, I had a first round with my bill, which was, went through the committee. I had tough questions, a lot of questions. I made some changes, and we were still in the pandemic. And then the election was called. So in this process, I had passed in the Senate. The bill was passed in the Senate, and then it died. And then it was off the books. So I had to start all over again after the election, from first reading, and do the whole process again, with different people in the committee. And the more I went through it, the more supporters I had. And at the end, There was no opposition in committee and no opposition in the Senate when this bill was passed. So it took a long time, but I'm told it's not completely out of the ordinary, that private members' bill can take time. In this case, I was not served because of the election arriving at the time it arrived.
Yeah, thanks. I'm glad I asked that because I thought the number was 4. It sounds like it's been twice, and thanks for the clarification on that. One of the concerns, obviously, I don't think anybody in this room feels that children should be accessing any types of pornography. But one of the issues is, quite frankly, is the age verification in the process. You had mentioned, and the bill mentions, that this is going to be done by a third-party company. Are there currently any Canadian companies who do this type of business, and who would they do it for? I mean, just specifically the age verification.
Yoti, mais c'est pas canadien. Yoti is one of the main players, but it has a place of business, I think, on the West Coast, but it's originally from Britain. YOTI. So this is one of the big players in age verification. There's quite many of them, but I think as a Canadian, there's one.
To interrupt, though, do you know who or what? There's a joke there, but I'll leave Mr. Biddle alone on that one. Who?
About you,
he really
maybe?
threw me off there. Who or what industries are they age verifying? You mentioned the company, but what are they doing now? What other for who? For what?
Well, it's a good question. I know there's age verification, for example, in betting online, but is it done by age verifier or in this case by the credit card? So I don't think we have a lot of age verifying in Canada. I'm sorry, I'm not able to answer intelligently your question. Would you want me to send you
That'd
an
be a
answer?
good answer. As I said, I'd like
Because
to know.
I think I have not researched that part.
Look at that. I've thrown you right there a loop. So there you go. That's why we're here. But yeah, I would like to know a couple of the names of companies and what industries they're currently doing for age verification. One of the other studies we've recently done in here was about cybersecurity, and it was astounding to hear about some of the companies, governments, big organizations who have been hacked, and a lot of private information has been taken or ransomed. Are you concerned about that at all with this? We've heard of one Canadian company. I'm sure there's others, hopefully. We don't know the size of them. We don't know who they're doing. Do you have any concerns with them and their cybersecurity of personal information?
I think we're all concerned, but when you have companies like Desjardins in Quebec, where we put our money, who has that type of problems, it obviously can happen everywhere. But I'm wondering, why would it be more of a problem or of a risk, I should say, with pornography than with banking, with all kind of other sectors? It's, once you start to be on the web and to transmit information on the web and do banking on the web, all those things exist. But as I say, on this question, in Germany, where they have the longest experience, they have not been les fuites de données, big scandals on that side with privacy of data.
Merci, madame.
One of my favorite shows of all time is Game of Thrones. Love that show. Became obsessed with it, saw it, watched it through, watching the spin-offs. It's on a Canadian provider, Crave. It would be covered by this legislation as it's defined. And so I have staff who I know are fans of Bridgerton on Netflix, which is another internet service provider that provides what is defined as sexually explicit content. But I know you're trying to prevent children from seeing pornography, but you didn't define in your legislation pornography, you defined sexually explicit content. And so things like the shows that I mentioned Even Academy Award-winning movies. Schindler's List, English Patient, Shakespeare in Love, Gladiator, Crash, 12 Years a Slave, Shape of Water, Green Book, Parasite. Based on the definition in the criminal code, these would all be covered. And so I guess my question is to you is why this overly broad definition, and why didn't you come up with a stronger, stricter definition of pornography rather than just using the sexually explicit definition in the criminal code?
Monsieur Biddle, si vous le permettez, je vais vous répondre.
Mr. Biddle, if you allow me, I'll answer in French. But I totally disagree with your premise because neither Game of Thrones nor Bridgerton, which I watch religiously, contain pornography. Neither do they contain sexually explicit material as defined in the criminal code. Here, I have the impression that you are not referring to the definition of sexually explicit material as drafted in the criminal code.
Much time. I'm looking right at the definition now. Dominant characteristic of which, and this is sexually explicit material, the dominant characteristic of which is the depiction for a sexual purpose of a person's genital organs or anal region, or if the person is female, her breasts. That is section 171.1 sub 5. Yep. That is very broad when it comes to what Canadians see on television, which they access without a digital ID. And you're proposing to change that and alter that. I think Canadians expect that when they go on to Netflix or Crave or the platforms, Amazon Prime, that they're able to access these shows without a digital ID to be able to do so. You're coming at this, and there's an old Supreme Court decision from the United States about pornography. I know it when I see it. And you're kind of making that position now and pointing us to, well, there's this criminal code definition, but it is very broad, Senator, and it is going to capture so much more content than I know you don't intend to. But this is the language of the legislation. And how can Canadians be assured that they won't be brought into this based on the wording of the legislation that I've just read, and I know you've been trying to read it to some of my other colleagues.
Yes, because, contrary to you, I don't think this is that broad. And I believe that if you look at the jurisprudence on how those particular 3 words have been interpreted by court, you will see, and earlier I quoted Professor Trudel, who was quoting the Sharp decision.
A judge.
No, he's not a judge.
Yes.
But he's an expert, and he's a legal expert. So, you're right that we can always say there's a danger. But what would you suggest? What kind of definition would we suggest? Because pornography.
Again, Senator, you're in a we know it when we see it kind of item. I don't have much more time. I don't have much more time left. But I'll point. We've left the agency you've left the agency that's going to police this very vague. But really, the only agency that exists that the federal government has is the CRTC. Is this what you expect? Who you will expect will be policing this legislation?
I did not include it because I didn't want to have to weigh on that. I think those decisions.
But that's the most likely agency to deal with it, yes or no? The RCMP?
No. It's just that
it'll be the CRTC. They are the most likely competent agency to deal with this.
It has remained undefined because, as you know yourself, your own government is these days trying to have a commission, an ombudsman, and all those things.
But you'll agree with me, it's the CRTC is most likely. You don't want it in there because it wouldn't be popular, but you'll agree with me that the CRTC is the most likely agency to deal with this.
I'm not agreeing with you.
So some mythical agency that the government will create is a better agency to deal with it? So with respect to agencies that exist, Senator, you agree with me, this is the agency that is most likely to police this particular piece of legislation.
We're going to have to cut it off with, you may answer, and then we'll cut it off.
Well, I'm not gonna be pushed to answer with a question you agree with me. It's not the kind of question I like. You know, we have not defined in the bill who it is, so you can certainly think what you're thinking, but I would come back to the fact that, you know, what would you have done to define pornography without taking the definition of the criminal code, which is one of our main law in Canada, and which is serious, and which has been interpreted by all the courts as being pornography, not as being artsy pictures of whatever. And, you know, you're right that there's a dose, you know, it's not scientific, but I would say this definition is pretty good and has been used in the past to show that this is not light. This is pornography we're talking about when we're using sexually explicit material. So we disagree.
Merci.